Uh, Welcome back. I guess we're doing this because I'm kind of bored. I want to take a little bit doing this. And welcome. It is, well, if you literally have a beating heart, you know what I mean? Careful there. I left yep, I left the train removal thing on. Anyway, I think I'm gonna keep on working on the governmental building. I don't know. Oh my god, that is annoying. I dropped my keyboard. October 2010 outbreak.
Occasion of flooding that can occur from like an inch or two of rainfall, and of course, some random YouTuber who I've watched since he had like 10,000 subscribers or something. But if I were to tell you tornadoes, you would rightly slap me across the face and ask me if I was dropped on my head as a child. But it's true. Severe weather across the southwestern United States is beyond unusual. I mean, the occasional tornado does happen once in a while there, but a full-on tornado outbreak is pretty much unheard of in that general area. Well, except for one instance. In October of 2010, an extremely unusual severe weather outbreak occurred in Arizona, accompanied with a large flooding event that occurred in the southwestern United States. A total of 12 tornadoes. Not a lot of tornadoes for an outbreak in the
Yeah.
scheme of things,
Very
but
small amount of tornadoes.
Given its location, it was the largest tornado outbreak observed west of the Rocky Mountains. A large hailstorm was also observed with the storm system, with hail as large as 3 inches in diameter falling onto the ground below, specifically near Phoenix, causing $2.6 billion in damages alone. In total,
My God.
the storms would cause $4.9 billion in damages, becoming the costliest weather event to ever occur in the state of Arizona. Considering the odd circumstances surrounding the outbreak and its location, I believe it is worth looking into this event in detail. Today, I will be looking into the October 2010 Arizona tornado outbreak and hailstorm, talking about the severe weather that had already occurred that year, the synopsis, the event itself, and the aftermath. Welcome to Nature's Fury. 2010 was a year that had plenty of severe weather events throughout. To prevent myself from going too long like the Atlanta tornado video, I will be going over the major outbreaks of the year briefly. The first major tornado outbreak occurred from April 22nd through the 25th, where a total of 88 tornadoes touched down across the Central Plains and the southern United States, including an EF4 tornado that tore through Yazoo City, Mississippi. There was another outbreak 4 days later from April 29th through May 2nd, where a number of tornadoes touched down across the Central Plains, Midwest, and lower Mississippi Valley. In May, there was an intense tornado outbreak that spawned multiple significant tornadoes from May 10th through the 13th, including 2 EF4 tornadoes, with one of those hitting Norman, Oklahoma. From May 22nd through the 25th, an outbreak of tornadoes occurred in the northern plains, including an EF4 tornado near Boulder, South Dakota. From June 5th through the 6th, a number of tornadoes occurred across the Midwest and the upper
God, I
Ohio
love Tornado
Valley,
Archive as a platform, or as a website.
Ohio. The most significant tornado event of the year occurred from June 16th through the 17th, where a total of 82 tornadoes touched down across the northern plains, including 4 EF4 tornadoes across North Dakota and Minnesota.
Ooh.
The most violent tornadoes from a single outbreak at this time since the 2008 Super Tuesday outbreak. A small
Super
outbreak occurred
Tuesday.
from the 25th through the 26th, although said small outbreak did include an EF4 tornado that occurred in Iowa. No major outbreaks occurred in July, but on August 7th, several tornadoes touched down in the northern plains and Midwest, including an EF4 tornado near Tyler, North Dakota. From thenceforth, there weren't many other major tornado outbreaks that had a number of significant weather weather events that I will definitely look into later on, especially the outbreaks in June. As October came, severe weather was definitely not the primary concern of most Americans at this time. But of course, Mother Nature had other plans. Plans that ultimately were even more bizarre than your typical tornado outbreak. Though, real quick, not a lot of people who like these videos are subscribed to the channel, so if you enjoy the videos that I do, consider subscribing. It helps me a lot and tells me I'm doing something right. Anyways, back to the Arizona tornado outbreak. Okay, so this segment will be longer than usual because there's a lot more I have to talk about because we need to talk about severe weather outbreaks in the Southwest in general. If you haven't been living under a rock, you might be aware that any tornado event west of the Rocky Mountains is rare, to put it.
It is rare.
This is because of the general lack of moisture in the areas outside of the Pacific Northwest. But the Pacific Northwest has its own problems, such as temperatures and a bunch of other stuff that I don't want to get into here. Basically, if you have any knowledge of climate norms of the different subsections of the US, you probably already knew that the southwestern United States doesn't get a lot of severe weather. However,
yeah, I looked on Tornado Archive. It's very thin out with EF zeros and ones scattered everywhere.
WS Flagstaff at the time, wrote a paper titled Synoptic Environments Associated with Tornadoes in Northern Arizona. The paper examined 75 tornado days in the state from 1950 through 2006, and discovered some trends that came along with those tornado days in particular. Regarding the cool season tornado days, of which there were 38, a cold core low-level pressure system was embedded in the mid-latitude westerlies, with North Arizona being in the warm sector. The positioning of the low-pressure system in the warm sector allows for moist, tropical air from the Pacific Ocean to reach into Arizona. With this came instability and additional lift. The median instability was found to be at roughly 450 joules per kilogram. The low-pressure systems, detached
pretty good.
from the jet stream, provided ample...
Tornadoes, really all they are is just an unstable column of air. What tornadoes do is they try to neutralize each other. They try to neutralize wind to make it neutral. Everything in the universe wants to be neutral. Hot air wants to become cold, and cold air wants to become hot. When you leave the door open, cold particles are very slow and hot particles are very fast. What happens is that the cold air wants to become warmer, so the warm air, or the cold air, sucks and attracts governmental building. It attracts hot air, right? And then the hot air and cold air molecules neutralize and become warm air, which is why when you leave your door open at winter, it sucks out all the hot air. Hot air travels towards cold air. Cold air does not travel towards hot air. Hot air will rise, and cold air will sink. It's a general rule of thumb of how air works.
Southerly shear into Arizona. These trends are present across multiple tornado outbreaks in the southwestern United States, even with how rare they are. So what occurred with the October 2010 outbreak? Something very similar to previous tornado events that had already occurred in Arizona to this point. An omega block was present across the country, characterized by a high-pressure system over the central U.S. and two cold core low-pressure systems, one near West Virginia and one off the coast of California. The Storm Prediction Center initially did not forecast much from the event itself, with a slight risk issued on October 5th and the 6th. The 5th had no tornadoes from the outbreak, but surface dew points near 60 degrees allowed for thunderstorm development near Phoenix, Arizona, something I will cover shortly. But the 6th was not expected to be a day worth writing home about. Originally, a general thunderstorm risk was issued for Arizona because the severe threat was expected to wane later in the day. Instability was expected to rise to around 500 to 1,000 joules per kilogram in the early morning hours.
Not way too much,
The severe
I think.
weather potential was expected to decrease in the afternoon hours. However, during the pre-dawn hours, the low-pressure system retrograded to the west-northwest, extending the window of time for severe weather to occur. In the early morning hours, storm relative helicity values in excess of 200 meters squared per second squared and bulk shear in excess of 60 knots at the 500 millibar level were observed in Arizona, with dew points ranging from the 40s into the 60s. The factors just stated indicated that there was an unstable environment that had the ability to produce supercell thunderstorms in a corridor in central and northern Arizona. If the low-pressure system did not retrograde, there was a high likelihood that this event would not have been as severe as it turned out to be. So with the synopsis done, the events began to unfold, starting with a non-tornadic event on the 5th.
I'm ready to earn my master's in healthcare, but I need a school that understands my schedule.
On October 5th, the main story coming out of Arizona that day regarding severe weather was not tornadoes, but rather one of the costliest hailstorms in U.S. history. Throughout the early morning hours of the 5th, thunderstorms produced small hail across portions of central and northern Arizona. This associated with the cold core low off the coast of California. Midday, the SPC issued a severe thunderstorm watch for Arizona.
You better get a steel umbrella.
Strong winds, but hail was the primary threat. Around 1:30 p.m., a multi-cell cluster of storms moved through the Phoenix metro area, dropping some small hail again and causing flash flooding in the area. But the worst of the hailstorm came from 4 p.m. to 5:30 p.m. Large hail, ranging from 1.75 inches in diameter to 3 inches in diameter,
Jesus,
battered the Phoenix metro area, alongside other communities and portions of Arizona. Loud noises of the chunks of ice smashing onto the ground below, onto the cars below, onto the buildings below. The loud noises of hail falling into the ground was the only thing audible in the Phoenix metro for a short time. In total, damages, at least according to insurance claims. Looking at the footage from the hailstorm, it's one of the most impressive hailstorms I've ever witnessed myself, especially for where it occurred. Early on October 6th, environmental conditions were already overperforming due to the retrograding of the cold core low over the California coastline. Temperatures were in the mid-60s into portions of the upper 70s in some locations. Dew points weren't amazing, ranging from the low 40s into portions of the low 60s across central Arizona. Despite the low amounts of moisture in the atmosphere, it was just barely enough for supercell thunderstorms to develop. The bulk shear at the 500 millibar level was strong and supported rotating thunderstorms, with bulk shear ranging from 50 to near 70 knots across much of Arizona. CAPE was also present, ranging from 500 to 1,000 joules per kilogram, enough instability to support the potential for severe weather. It was only a matter of time before thunderstorms would develop. The supercells began to show signs of rotation before the tornadoes touched down. It's thought that the mountainous terrain south of the Flagstaff metro area may have inhibited some tornadic development early on. But at 4:55 a.m. Mountain Standard Time, the first significant tornado of the day touched down. The first tornado of the day touched down north of Payson, Arizona, moving towards the north-northeast for 14.8 miles, going through mostly forest land, blowing down hundreds of Pondicera pine trees, and at least one alligator juniper that was 2.5 feet in diameter was snapped off. The tornado itself had a peak width of 400 yards, and the most significant impacts the tornado had on human life was downing trees on State Route 87. 9 miles south-southwest of Belmont, Arizona, a tornado touched down and began producing EF2 damage, downing trees as it moved through mostly forest land, with complete destruction of the forest with all trees felled in the area for hundreds of yards. The tornado cycled, touching back down, and would remain on the ground for a total of 26 miles. The tornado first struck an RV dealership, causing structural damage to the building, and anywhere between 30 and 40 RVs were destroyed. The tornado passed within 2/3 of a mile from the NWS Flagstaff office. The first of 3 close calls that NWS Flagstaff had with the tornadoes from this day. The tornado proceeded to cross over I-40, snapping multiple power poles before moving into the Flagstaff Meadows neighborhood. In the neighborhood, 100 houses suffered damage, with 21 of those suffering heavy damage or were destroyed completely. 7 were injured in the neighborhood. From thenceforth, the tornado continued into mostly forest land, moving northward for 14.7 miles before entering a burn scar. The burn scar had an anemometer, which read a 3-second wind speed of 115 miles per hour, a 1-second wind speed of 161 miles per hour, and an instantaneous wind speed of 185 miles per hour. However, there was no damage near the burn scar to correlate with any wind speeds. The tornado continued north for another 1.5 miles before lifting 20 miles north-northwest of Flagstaff. The East Bellamont tornado traveled a total of 26 miles with a peak width of 500 yards, injuring 7. At 5:55 a.m. Mountain Standard Time, a large tornado touched down 15 miles south of Bellamont. The tornado proceeded to move practically parallel to the first tornado spawned by the cell that produced the Eastern Bellamont tornado. The tornado quickly began producing heavy tree destruction where it touched down and as it moved further north. While moving northward, the tornado passed within 1/3 of a mile of the NWS Flagstaff office. The tornado moved through Camp Navajo.
My God, again.
Minor structural damage occurred before moving through 28 rail cars were derailed. However, damage was minimal otherwise. The tornado continued moving towards the north after hitting Bellamont, lifting after crossing US Route 180. The tornado was initially rated an EF2, but was later upgraded to an EF3 due to the complete tree destruction observed south of Bellamont. The tornado was massive with a peak width of 800 yards. Despite the fierce intensity of the tornado, damages were minimal due to the sparsely populated area. Just as the EF3 tornado lifted, another EF2 tornado touched down in close proximity to where the other tornadoes near Bellamont tracked, and passed within 2 miles of the NWS office before dissipating.
Oh my God.
This marked the third significant tornado to pass by the office that morning, all within walking distance from their front door. The majority of the damage came from tree damage, thankfully. However, some officials believe that this tornado may have been composed of multiple smaller tornadoes, a so-called tornado family, with the strongest of the bunch being the aforementioned EF2. However, the strongest tornado of the day occurred at 11:20 a.m., where an EF3 tornado touched down near Appaloosa Ridge. The tornado was on the ground briefly, only traveling for 4 miles. The tornado had a peak width of 1,100 yards, striking 3 transmission towers, including one that was completely flattened. The tornado had winds near 165 miles per hour, a borderline EF4, and despite it doing no damage outside of the transmission towers, what's considered to be the Tuba City EF3 is one of the strongest tornadoes in Arizona state history. As the events progressed into the late morning hours, conditions began to deteriorate for tornadic development. There were a few tornadoes that occurred after 7 a.m., most of those being weak with the exception of the Tuba City EF3.
Rain-X premium silicone wiper blades last 2 times longer than traditional wipers.
Notably, there was a tornado that was observed in Utah in the afternoon hours. While the threat of tornadoes was over, severe winds and hail were observed in Arizona, Nevada, Utah, and Colorado. Flash flooding also occurred across portions of California, Arizona, Nevada, and Utah due to the constant flow of moist air from the cold core low pressure system. After the storms moved through, damage surveys began to be conducted, and speculations about the possibility of this tornado outbreak being the largest in the state of Arizona's history was confirmed. The majority of impacts from the tornado outbreak were relatively minor, all things considered. Most of the tornadoes went through forest land, meaning that actual damages from the tornadoes themselves were relatively small. Only 7 injuries were attributed to the tornado outbreak. The worst of the damage came from the tornadoes that went through Bellamont, specifically in the Flagstaff Meadows neighborhood, the RV store, and the transmission towers near Tuba City. In total, 12 tornadoes touched down in the southwestern United States from this outbreak, the largest tornado outbreak observed west of the Rocky Mountains. 11 in Arizona, a record for the most tornadoes from a single outbreak in the state of Arizona. Of those tornadoes, there were 4 EF2s and 2 EF3s. The 12th tornado was a small, short-lived EF0 in south-central Utah. But hey, it still counts towards the total for the outbreak as a whole. Although the exact number of tornadoes depends on where you look, and I would at least like to talk about the discrepancies between resources here just for a little bit. while researching this outbreak, one of the major sources I used was the Tornado Talk article, and the article mentioned that the numbers from the SPC Tornado Report database actually differs from what the NWS says. So what is actually responsible for the discrepancies here? Well, what essentially happened is that the SPC database was the original survey's results. However, in 2019, NWS flagged that compiled the storm histories of tornadoes and compiled the storm survey findings from nearly 10 years prior. The numbers I'm using in this video is from the National Weather Service, while the SPC website still states that there were 8 tornadoes from this outbreak with 11 reports. This only really asks the question of how many have this same issue. Events where the SPC database either over or under reports the amount of tornadoes due to the data being outdated. Now, as to whether or not I can say if there are other outbreaks that suffer from this, I can't tell you for sure. But I think it's about...
The death toll from at least one tornado
2008 Parkersburg EF5.
the state with reports of many tornadoes twisting through several communities.
Hello everyone,
Cat.
welcome back to my channel. My name is Carly. Today we're going to be talking about a tornado disaster that I genuinely don't think gets talked about enough. The Parkersburg tornado of 2008 is the second ever tornado in the United States to have been given an EF5 rating, second to the Greensburg tornado, which happened just a year before. And before the Greensburg tornado, the last F5 rated tornado in the United States was the Moore, Oklahoma tornado of 1999. So the weight of a tornado receiving an F or EF5 rating is both heavy and very rare. So keeping all those things in mind, this is the story of the Parkersburg EF5 tornado. Parkersburg is a small town in Butler County, Iowa, seated about 80 miles northeast of Des Moines. The city got its beginnings in the mid-19th century when John Connell and his son William built a log cabin in 1857. Several years later, a railroad company would scout the area, and from there, the city would slowly begin to grow. And Parker's
Thought you'd
seeing
like
their
that.
children grow up. Nothing major happens here. It's quiet, and that's exactly the charm of a town like Parkersburg, that small town feeling that really draws people in to live there for generations. But unfortunately for Parkersburg, it was about to experience a trial beyond what most people would ever have to endure in their entire lives. When you look at Iowa, it is inside the ever ambiguous Tornado Alley, and having had some of the most F5 rated tornadoes in the country, the state of Iowa is more than familiar with a tornado or two. In fact, Iowa is often highly ranked for historically having some of the most violent tornadoes since the year 1950. Generally speaking, certain months are correlated with having higher tornado frequencies in that area. For
Thank you.
example, the months of March through May are
I love
often
watching
associated
videos
with
and playing
tornado
this.
activity in the southern states, while June and July are often associated with being peak activity in the northern plains and Midwest. But May of 2008 spared nobody. The entire month seemingly was riddled with tornadoes through a large swath of the country. So let's take a look at the environment that would inevitably spawn one of this century's most violent storms. In the days leading up to the infamous Parkersburg tornado, the environment had already been incredibly volatile. but particularly between
Does she have
May 23rd
Pecos
and
Hanks
1st,
painting
where multiple severe weather
with 3
outbreaks
tornadoes?
ravaged
That's
portions
interesting.
of the mid and southwest. In just 9 days, over 239 confirmed tornadoes would take 13 lives and cause over $343 million in damage, with several EF3 tornadoes, one EF4, and of course the Parkersburg EF5. So having already issued multiple high-risk days that had verified, the forecasters at the Des Moines NWS office are already on high alert. So by May 20th, 2008, when a surface low is showing up on models projected to move into northern Minnesota, there was naturally some concern on what that
Yeah.
progression might look like. Erring on the side of caution, the Des Moines office issues their Day 5 outlook to include a possibility of a multiple day threat for relatively widespread storms. The very next day, as the event is now getting closer, now in the Day 4 outlook, forecasters note, and now, notably,
Okay, so there's these like microwave towers, and I really want to get my hands on one. Well, thanks. Anyway, at the bottom of these towers, there's these buildings, and when I'm saying these are tough buildings, I'm saying they are tough buildings. One of the buildings I entered survived an EF4 tornado. It's actually the infamous Washington, Illinois EF4. It is one of the most severe storms I've actually witnessed as a kid. It's one of the very few storms, even though we lived 20 miles away from it, when it was actually happening. Like, I remember my mom going into my room saying, "Race, turn off the Xbox. We gotta go to the basement." What's going on? And she's like, this is like 2013, so it was years ago. And she's like, "It's getting bad. There's bad weather outside. We gotta go down in the basement." Luckily, we never got hit or even close to being hit, but I'm glad we stopped. I think I remember back in June. In June, I think I was playing and I had to shut off because it was getting bad. Like, there was a tornado that just almost skid past my house.
forecasters are seeing the potential for tornadoes. As the days passed, in conjunction with other atmospheric elements present, it was now apparent that severe weather wasn't just possible, but looking likely. But interestingly enough, the initial concern wasn't for Iowa specifically. The main concern just 2 days before the Parkersburg tornado had been the ever infamous triple point, which was forecasted to set up over southern Minnesota, not Iowa. So now it's the night before the Parkersburg tornado, and at this point, while the concern isn't initially for Iowa for tornadoes specifically, that was very quickly about to change. It's now early in the morning on Sunday, May 25th, 2008. At 2 a.m. on Sunday, May 25th, the SPC issues their first initial Day 1 outlook. And initially with this very first update, there is a slight risk over a large swath of the country, and this slight risk was combined notably with a 10% hatched risk for tornadoes. Until the next update at 8 a.m., the atmosphere was very rapidly changing. Now, by the time of the 8 a.m. update, the SPC decides to upgrade the slight risk to now include 2 areas of moderate risks. One being over
Things are
central
starting to get a little
Kansas,
bit
and the second
toasty.
one notably over portions of western Wisconsin and eastern Minnesota. Iowa isn't in these moderate risks at all. And the reason that Iowa was not placed in the sort of target area or in a higher tornado probability was because at this point, the SPC was thinking that Iowa would be more in the damaging wind category. And this was because all the models that they had been looking at were actually really downplaying the growing instability that would inevitably be directly over Iowa in the coming hours. Now, here's where things start to get interesting. By early afternoon over central Iowa, although projected to remain mostly cloudy with lower temperatures,
We got 1 hour left of the year, boys and girls. 1 hour left.
in fact, some areas in
2023 is on the horizon.
with a 55-degree dew point at 8 in the morning to an 84-degree temperature with a 70-degree dew point by early afternoon. So along with those very quickly rising temperatures, so did the instability values follow. And with higher instability in Cape, as we know, there is ample energy for storms to feed off of. Energy that supercells love.
Yes,
Some
Mom.
places in Iowa by the early afternoon would see over 3,500 joules per kilogram of Cape, which is way more than enough to produce.
Wait, how many kilojoules per?
Iowa by the early afternoon would see over 3,500
Oh, 3,000.
joules per kilogram of
Damn, that's a lot of energy right
way
there.
more than enough to produce strong storms, which can produce tornadoes.
That's a lot of energy right there.
So now it's just
She's
after
starting to
3 p.m.
cook.
in central Iowa, and now that the instability is present, Iowa is quickly becoming the target for potential severe weather.
Tell that the instability certainly was getting pretty high during the day, and I started checking my phone, checking my radar app.
We get something to form in that environment, we knew that it would be explosive.
It's now just after 2:30 p.m. and a cluster of storms are beginning to form near Fort Dodge in western Iowa. And at this point, although the storms are fairly strong, they still haven't reached that prime atmosphere in central and eastern Iowa yet. By early afternoon, the mesoanalysis showed numerous thermodynamic and wind shear values in the range of concern for violent and long-track tornadoes. And we can see this by the soundings done for the region. It's also noted and almost implied in a lot of the retrospective studies done on the Parkersburg storm that a gravity wave had some kind of influence on perhaps the intensification of the Parkersburg storm and ultimately the tornado. I don't personally know that much about gravity waves. I do know that in the past they have had some interesting influence on storms like Gerald, for example. So if I can find something, I will link some research for you to read through if you're interested in that.
3 p.m.
By 3:30 p.m., seeing all
3
these
p.m.
atmospheric ingredients come together for now potentially a really violent day in central Iowa, the National Weather Service decides to issue a PDS tornado watch, a particularly dangerous situation watch over central and eastern
That's
Iowa.
not a good sign.
By this
Particularly
point,
dangerous
spotters are
situation is
deployed throughout numerous counties
some of the
within
one of the
central
worst
and
warnings
eastern
you can
Iowa to
receive.
keep an eye on those storms that are progressing from the west. The series of storms that ultimately contained what would go on to become the
PDSs are very
supercell
rarely
tornado
issued.
had already formed. It's in western Iowa, moving eastward, about to enter that primed, ripe atmosphere. Sometime just after 4 o'clock, as those storms are entering the volatile atmosphere, we are very quickly taking supercellular structure, and one is becoming more dominant. All the ingredients have come together for this storm, and it's ready to produce something massive. Just a few short minutes later, by 4:22 p.m., the rotation is strong enough that the National Weather Service decides to go ahead and issue a tornado warning for this rotation, seeing that a tornado is inevitable.
It is there.
There it is.
Where's Bucket?
He's in the garage.
I think we better go down.
Yeah, I think you might want to go. That's a wedge. Oh my god, look at that. Look at that debris cloud. You could probably see it. It fills up almost the entire screen. It goes from like right here to like right there. Usually it'd be like that big. That's a very wide debris cloud for a starting tornado. That's actually really rare to see them starting debris cloud go that big.
Wow.
Damn, that is... Man, it's just starting?
It is.
That...
It's not compacting except over on the left-hand edge.
Dude, it is sweeping.
There's a tornado siren.
At 4:45 p.m. now,
That's a
2 miles
killer right there.
southwest of the small town of Applington, the supercell produces and touches down. The Parkersburg tornado has just been born.
Train spotter reported a large tornado on the ground near the intersection of Highway D17. It is in the warned area.
Usually they don't really start that big. I've never seen tornadoes start that big. They usually start as cones and they widen.
Right on top of him, isn't it? Wow, it's getting close over here.
Can you imagine the horror when you look on the news and you hear that that's been rated EF5? Dude, you better... If you look closely, you can actually see the tornado. You see that, how it's kind of going to the left there? That stuff that's kind of coming in from the left? I'm sorry, it's... That's inflow jet. That stuff, it kind of comes off the ground and it starts curling around into the tornado. That's hot air and it's rising.
In the first few seconds of being down,
Inflow jet.
on the storm, and the Twister is wasting no time in becoming a very impressive.
Yeah, it's sucking up hot air.
Tornado is
It's
moving
feeding.
east through Butler County, and it's now very quickly becoming apparent that Parkersburg is directly in its path. By 4:51 p.m., the sirens are already going off in Parkersburg, giving the residents some time to get into shelter. And that's thanks to spotters who were able to confirm, law enforcement who helped confirm the tornado as well. This gave the people a few extra minutes to get to safety, and those few extra minutes make a huge difference. Just as the tornado is approaching the southwestern tip of Parkersburg, it's already a staggering 3/4 of a mile wide.
That's starting? Jeez, that's a wide tornado. Not like really wide tornado. I consider anything above 2 miles stupid wide for a tornado.
And at 4:56 p.m., the tornado enters Parkersburg.
Certainly the structure of the storm is very, very characteristic of a large tornado, and certainly
It's Greensburg all over again.
Weather Service, a large tornado that would include Parkersburg, also now of greatest danger. You folks in Waverly.
Immediately upon entering the southwestern corner of town, the first thing the tornado encounters are dozens of homes, and it's already hitting at such violent intensity.
What? Is she okay? Okay, you're at Stickley's? Okay, stay in the bathtub.
It's as soon as this tornado enters the southwestern corner.
I really want property. I don't know if I'll be able to get it, but I want this property in like Wisconsin. And it's got one of these towers on it, and it's got the strength where I estimate it can take an EF5 directly on and survive. And when I say take an EF5, I mean serious. I think it might actually be able to take an EF5. Oh yeah, I said this before. It took an EF4, the one that went from Washington. It took it direct on and it survived. No collapse, no crack in the infrastructure, like the Radio Shack, but that was built of 6 to 12 inches of concrete, survived. Beautiful.
Directly eastward across Highway 57 and 14. Again, this is primarily an area of mostly homes. As the tornado continued to churn over the small town, although at this point only hitting homes, the tornado now hits a few businesses, including 2 banks, the elementary school, and eventually into the high school. And because the town of Parkersburg itself is so small, the twister at 3/4 of a mile wide is engulfing all of these homes and businesses, all within just a minute or two.
Jesus.
Within just 5 very short and horrifying minutes, over 150 to 200 homes would be completely engulfed and destroyed by this tornado at EF4 and EF5 intensity. That
Ooh.
means they are essentially wiped clean.
The map just finger snapped off of the face of the earth.
Holy fuck, Russ, look! Get in the cooler, quick! Run my Parkersburg lumber! Wait a minute, show it! Get away from that glass over there, girls, boys! Get down! Get away from that glass!
Oh my god. I've heard that. Your ears pop. They've survived.
We may have a very large tornado on the ground, but certainly we're going to continue. Let's see. End of Parkersburg.
The tornado has now crossed over a majority of the southern edge of Parkersburg, but it was about to get even more intense. As the tornado is exiting off the eastern end of the Parkersburg residence, it produces its most violent damage in its lifetime, EF5 damage across multiple homes. These were the homes that would ultimately be slabbed. Only the foundation remained with nothing on top. The tornado ultimately
Man, that house just got effing slabbed. Some of the worst damage to ever be done by tornadoes is slabbing.
In under 10 minutes, the
I call it
town of
slabbing at least.
Parkersburg was destroyed.
So those of you, although not in a warning in Black Hawk County, you want to be very, very careful as this storm moves in. These storms not only have a history of producing a tornado, large hail, some very, very intense lightning and heavy rain, but these are storms that can hold together for a long period of time.
It's now 4:59 p.m. and Parkersburg has just taken a direct hit from an EF5 tornado. And at this point, despite having unleashed such raw power on Parkersburg, this twister was far from done producing violent damage. It's at this point also between Parkersburg and New Hartford that a
Must be you.
rainbow of debris would be noted in open cornfields. You can see from the kind of ground scouring and the damage it did to trees that this was still a very, very violent storm. Continuing its track eastward by 5:09 p.m., the tornado now moves through the New Hartford area, causing significant tree and structural damage at, once again, EF4 and EF5 intensity.
Let's say up toward New Hartford right now. That's the area you really, really want to be on the lookout right now as the storm moves in. The latest update as of 5 o'clock from the National Weather Service, trained weather spotters still following a tornado now.
Oh, Father, I just pray that you would protect everyone in the path of that storm.
Man, it's a wedge. Wedges are just nightmare fuel in and of themselves.
After having ravaged multiple towns at this point, the twister is starting to lose a little bit of momentum. At this point, it's 5:26 p.m. The tornado has been going on for almost an hour at this point, and it's still going. Up next are the northern areas of Waterloo and Cedar Falls. The silver lining here is that although there was destruction in northern Cedar Falls and Waterloo, they did not take a direct hit, and it was also not in the violent range category. As the twister moved over the northern portions of Cedar Falls and Waterloo's, it would be at EF2 to EF3 intensity. It's here that the tornado starts to act a little bit more erratically. It's now varying in forward velocity and taking sudden abrupt turns. And at this point, having unleashed so much violence on multiple towns, the tornado is finally starting to reach the end of its life. The tornado inflicts its final damage on one last farmstead, and at 5:58 p.m., just to the southwest of Fairbank, the infamous Twister would finally die off. In just 1 hour, untold damage has occurred in central Iowa.
How many deaths?
The house is completely obliterated. Get to the left there. Yeah, just stop. Just stop. We gotta go into rescue. Massive destruction, large gas leaks, flattened houses. I'm very serious.
Damn, that is absurd. It just completely destroyed everything, too. Silos are crumpled in like tin cans. House is slabbed.
This is KCRG TV9 News at 10.
Deadly severe weather tears through eastern Iowa today, leaving devastation in its wake. The worst community hit appears to be Parkersburg. Now take a look at this video. A tornado leveled parts of the town this afternoon. Tonight, Governor Chet Culver has issued a disaster proclamation for Black Hawk and Butler counties. He says the state will do whatever it can to support local emergency management teams as they help the communities destroyed by at least, again, one tornado.
Immediately after the tornado, it was apparent that Parkersburg had sustained the brunt of this storm. Looking at the immediate damage photos after, very much of Joplin with how widespread the damage is. It's almost as if you cannot see the end of the damage.
Claire, so far we know 2 people are dead here in Parkersburg, and many more have had injuries. There were ambulances coming and going from Parkersburg all afternoon and well into the evening as well. You can see behind me, these were people's homes, and now it pretty much just looks like a pile of debris and rubble.
The kind of damage that had just been done in Parkersburg meant that the leveling and complete destruction of homes, foundations being swept clean, meant that the very first 5 people do a search and rescue operation. And what you see when you come across a disaster area like Parkersburg just after a tornado has hit, it's not just the destruction. You are seeing people screaming and crying out. You're seeing people injured or perhaps not living anymore. It's the gas leaks and the smell of pine that hits you. It's live lines on the road. Things that are so unnatural and so unfathomable for us to see on a large scale.
There's kind of an underlying sense of grief. They know that 5 friends and family members and neighbors have lost their lives here. Town itself is under a curfew tonight. That curfew kicked into effect at 8 o'clock. We're in a subdivision just to the east of town, and take a look. These are 2 vehicles that were parked in a 3-car garage. This is pretty much all that's left of this house.
The difference between EF3 and EF5 damage, EF3...
A quiet Memorial Day weekend in Parkersburg turned into a terrifying, devastating disaster in a matter of minutes.
We just heard creaking and cracking and everything. All I saw was the biggest black wall in my life. I couldn't even tell. I didn't think it was a tornado.
Neighbors tried to help each other once the wind died down, but the shock was just too much for some people.
He was trying to get out of the basement. And we tried to help him, and then he was okay, but then he had a heart attack and died.
And one of the
Oh my
elements to
God.
consider also when we talk about search and rescues being
Poor
done in
person.
a smaller town like Parkersburg is that although it might be easier to account for everybody considering that the population is under 2,000, that also means that the people who are conducting the search and rescue, the firefighters,
They know each other.
policemen, and volunteers, are coming across people that they know. Perhaps it's a friend or a loved one or a coworker. So during the process of search and rescue, the police chief Christopher Luring had said one of his main goals and the goals of the search and rescue team was to find a dignified place, essentially a makeshift morgue for the victims. Initially, he was estimating between 70 to 100 victims. It would be ultimately significantly less than that. Granted, when you look at the damage photos from Parkersburg, and it's, you know, as far as the eye can see of homes completely destroyed, I can understand where they would estimate that the total number of potential victims would have been much higher than it actually was.
When I initially realized we needed a morgue, and I knew for a fact my family was going to be put there, and my aunt was. She was placed in the morgue. I had no morgue training. You know, that's not something you learn at the Law Enforcement Academy. But in an incident command, I knew that it had to be at the fire station in my head. When I got there, I didn't have maps. I didn't really have anything. I had a small, like 6x6 map in my squad car. That was the first map that I used, along with other folks, to send out first responders to the appropriate.
I'll work on those later. Survey.
Shortly after the devastation is beginning to be realized by the National Weather Service and outside authorities, helicopters were called in to take aerial surveys of the area to get a better understanding of just how widespread and devastating the tornado had actually been. By 10 a.m. the very next morning, a team of seasoned meteorologists and engineers would come out to survey the storm. And it didn't take long for them to realize that this was beyond an EF3 tornado. So in that case, when it's above an EF3 tornado,
Significant.
the National Weather Service usually will request to the headquarters to initiate a quick response team. And the purpose of that is to have experts in wind damage, expert engineers come out to do a more thorough and extensive report on the degree of damage to understand fully what rating to give violent tornadoes such as this one. The aerial and ground surveys showed that the tornado traveled east with 98% of the track moving through rural farmland and the remaining 2% moving over Parkersburg. According to the city and the survey, 200 sustained some kind of damage, 22 businesses and 37 assisted living residents as well. And in total, that's about 1/3 of the entire town of Parkersburg. The survey also found that the width of the tornado as it moved over Parkersburg was about 3/4 of a mile, and the total distance traveled by this twister would be some 43 miles, with a maximum wind speed of 205 miles per hour. The preliminary result was a low-end EF5 tornado in Butler County in both Parkersburg and New Hartford. Widespread EF2 damage was found in Black Hawk County as the tornado widened near the end of its life cycle, unquote. So that was what they listed in the subsequent survey. It was a low-end EF5. After going through and extensively verifying all the information on the surveys, the National Weather Service scheduled a conference to publicly discuss the rating of the Parkersburg tornado. Interestingly enough, the rating was actually leaked beforehand to the press somehow. I imagine that came from someone internally, but I don't think it was much of a surprise to a lot of people who saw the damage photos in Parkersburg that this tornado garnered an EF5 rating.
Why is it kept, secret?
There would ultimately be 7 fatalities within the city of Parkersburg, and for the entire tornado there would be 9. Officials said that at least one of the victims in Parkersburg had actually been in their basement, but they were actually killed when the foundation was swept clean and the basement was therefore exposed, and they were taken out of the basement.
Oh my
And
god.
this is one of the really tragic truths about EF4 to EF5, the upper echelon of tornadoes, is that a lot of times there's almost nothing you can do. They are so violent and so destructive that being in a home at all, unless it's an underground shelter, they're in some ways almost unsurvivable. Outside of the few fatalities that were discovered, there were a couple dozen people who were injured by flying debris who needed to be taken to hospitals. Now, again, we are going to be referencing the surveys done by the National Weather Service. Again, this is easily one of the most comprehensive surveys that I've ever read. One of the most important things in here is a list of findings that are not necessarily the shortcomings, but the things that could have been done better during prior to and after the event. One of the main findings that I found to be really interesting is that the morning day 1 update from the SPC, the outlook that we talked about, had actually diminished the tornado threat and favored straight line damaging winds, particularly over Iowa. One of the recommendations was that they should have used stronger language to really warn the public of the potential for a high ceiling day. If it's warranted, strong language should be used for high ceiling days. That was kind of the point. But instead, this office had sort of used the same kind of verbiage for the past 5 days and not really indicating any level of more severity. Finding number 5 is interesting because it points out that a lot of the tornado watches that were issued for the day were pretty confusing. Having consistent information go out to the general public is one of the most important parts of relaying that critical information, is not to confuse people, because it doesn't take much for people to not be interested in the weather. People already don't care about the weather, so to confuse them even a little bit is to kind of blow off their interest in a lot of ways. And this goes along with the next finding number 6, which found that there were several instances that meteorological phrases were used more often than layman's terms. Specifically, there was instances of meteorologists live on air that were using the terms wedge tornado, and they kept saying all severe modes possible. A lot of weather enthusiasts naturally know what those two things mean, but if you're saying that to the general public, they don't often know what a wedge tornado is. That's not common knowledge, and we cannot assume that it's common knowledge. That's when people get confused. So it's extremely important that basic terminology is used so that everyone is on the same page, everybody can understand at the same level. This is the external response summary in the National Weather Service report that's been done. This is kind of shady, y'all are gonna like this. Okay, and it says, quote, "The overall spotter and emergency management response was mixed. There were examples of excellent emergency management operations, such as Black Hawk County." So Black Hawk County was one that performed exceptionally well with the National Weather Service. It then goes on to say, "The Butler County Emergency Manager had no direct role or function in the tornado event during the warning phase. The Butler County Emergency Manager for Parkersburg was MIA during the tornado warning." Earlier, the National Weather Service had tried to call Butler County about the warning, and the emergency manager was on the road driving somewhere. They actually had no idea that the tornado was happening in Parkersburg at the time. Not only that,
stupid.
they still weren't coordinating with the National Weather Service until several hours after the event had already been over. So it's interesting that even the National Weather Service themselves notes that in their external review. They don't say lack of cooperation, but they certainly don't portray it in a good light either. It's pretty shady. One positive, though, I will note about Parkersburg before this event is that the county had actually installed brand new tornado sirens and tested them the day before the Parkersburg tornado. I think it actually really could have saved lives, having a brand new tornado siren. I don't want to focus too much on the findings here. These were just two that I found to be really interesting, but there's an entire list of findings in this report. Like I said, it's about 50 some odd pages, so if you're interested, I do recommend you go read it for yourself.
We're at the final
The
chapters.
response to the call for help to Parkersburg was immense. Volunteers from outside Parkersburg, outside of the county, outside of the state, and even outside of the country, all these people came flocking to Parkersburg to help in any way they could. Over 175 National Guard troops would be brought in. The Red Cross also very quickly came in to aid, providing food to just a few days, the mobile recovery center back on their feet. President Bush would visit Parkersburg in the next few days and declaring Butler County a disaster area. And this is really important because it allows for federal aid to really come in for the victims. This makes grants available for temporary housing, home repairs, and low-cost loans for people with uninsured properties, and on top of that, it helps businesses get the loans and help they need to get back on their feet. Most of the damage that came from the Parkersburg tornado was to majority of it, but there were also two banks, the elementary school, the Applington High School, and the church that were destroyed, which would all have to be rebuilt. But the people of Parkersburg, despite having so much damage, were still thankful that a lot of the essential parts of Parkersburg remained untouched. And namely, that was the downtown area where the essential businesses were located. That area was virtually untouched. And on top of that, the water tower and pump also were untouched, which meant the people who still had homes and the businesses in Parkersburg were still able to have running water, were able to use the restroom and have showers, which is something people often do not have in areas of major devastation like this, which, as you can imagine, is really detrimental to people trying to rebuild. Shortly after the debris cleanup began, and that naturally lasts for months on end, it's never as simple as just cleaning up and starting anew. It's always a really long and difficult process with many external variables that aren't typically discussed. If you think about it, you have to now find accommodations for hundreds of people, how they're going to clean up the debris, are the essential businesses like the banks and grocery stores intact, is insurance going to cover all of the expenses necessary to rebuild, how long are you going to be able to find accommodations for. These are so many variables that aren't often talked about, but this is a process that goes on for months and months, and oftentimes up to a year or more. So I don't want to sugarcoat it. It's
Another problem with these outbreaks like this is that people like to loot. They like to steal stuff. It's scummy. Let's see if I can find another one. Worst outbreak in Super Tuesday.
Unusual and anomalous.
Super Tuesday.
February 5th,
One of the worst tornado days in history.
Would probably have little significance in the long run, but for 2008 in the United States, it was a special day because it was Super Tuesday. For those out of the loop, Super Tuesday is the big primary election day where a bunch of states hold their primary elections to see which person will represent their respective party when the general election rolls around in November. Elections were in the mindsets of many Americans that February 5th, as they went out to go vote, go home, and wake up the next morning to see the results. Typical Super Tuesday behavior for those invested in politics. However, this Super Tuesday will be remembered years later not for what happened at the polls, but for what happened just outside of them. What occurred was one of the most unusual and anomalous severe weather events ever observed on this planet. A widespread, deadly tornado outbreak spanning primarily across Arkansas, Tennessee, Kentucky, Mississippi, and Alabama had just occurred. For the second time in the history of the Storm Prediction Center's existence, when it was founded in 1995, a high risk was issued for severe weather for the month of February. On the north side, a severe winter storm that impacted the Central Plains through the Midwestern states of the United States. Despite having 5 EF4 tornadoes and numerous significant tornadoes that touched down from the 5th through the 6th of February in 2008, the Super Tuesday outbreak is one of the lesser-known winter tornado outbreaks to those in the general public. As many people think of the December 10th through the 11th outbreak from 2021 when talking
Yeah, that
about
one. I remember that one. That was
tornado
bad.
outbreak. However, the devastation the Super Tuesday outbreak brought to the people of the Tennessee Valley, Lower Ohio River Valley, and Dixie Alley warrants a deeper analysis on the outbreak, both on a meteorological level and what the storm system inflicted onto the people who were affected. Today, I will be going over the 2008 Super Tuesday tornado outbreak and weather complex, starting with a background of the severe weather activity that had already occurred so far, the origins of the outbreak, the synopsis, what the storm system did, the aftermath, and the storm's legacy. Welcome to Nature's Fury. So, in order to understand the background behind the absurdity of what had already occurred in the realm of severe weather in 2008, alongside why the Super Tuesday...
It's not? I doubt it. Oh, well. Well,